high alert, and I want to deeply thank all those people who've come forward to get tested. It has helped us enormously in relation to dealing with the current outbreaks we're having in New South Wales. It is helping us, as Dr. Chant will explain, on tracing the original cause of the outbreak, and it's giving us some level of confidence in how to deal with the situation in coming days and weeks. So I really want to thank everybody, especially in the communities of southwestern Sydney. Your response has been outstanding. Please continue to come forward and get tested according to the health advice. If you've been to any of the venues that have been mentioned in that period of time, please come forward. Your direct contacts should also come forward. And of course, if you haven't been to any of those venues, but you are displaying symptoms, it goes without saying that you must come forward and get tested. It's been apparent to us, as it has been to the Australian Hotels Association themselves, that we need to take some further action to curtail some of that high-risk activity. And John Whelan is here with us from the AHA, and I want to thank him and his organisation for proactively coming forward and working with government to reduce the risk that comes with people gathering in larger venues in particular. We know from the health advice we've received from the beginning of the pandemic that indoor activity where people aren't seated is a huge health risk because it increases the chance of transmission. And it was actually the AHA's advice to us, which said that if you reduce bookings from 20 to 10, it reduces the likelihood for people who may mingle. That when you have a group of 10, the likelihood that everybody stays seated and that behaviour will continue is a safe option. So a number of the measures that we're announcing today, including a cap of 300 on any major venues, including the fact that if your venue has capacity for more than 250 people, there will be a full-time marshal on duty at all times to make sure the COVID-safe plans are being implemented. For venues that are less than 250, there will be a COVID-safe person there during those peak times when the venue is operating. And of course, the industry will also be mandating taking every single person's detail, and where possible, I know the industry is also working to make sure all of it's done electronically to allow for clarity and legibility and quick information. So this is a good example of industry and government working together to reduce the risk during a pandemic. Whether we like it or not, the reality is that life is not normal, and it will not be normal until we have a vaccine or a cure. Life will not be normal during the pandemic, and so the question we ask in New South Wales is what can we do to reduce the risk, to reduce the spread, so that we continue to have a good level of activity in our community, a good level of people staying in their jobs and going about their business. So what New South Wales is always looking for is opportunities to reduce the risk, and we know from the health experts what that risk is. It is mainly indoor venues with a number of people that are more likely to transmit the disease, which is extremely contagious, as we all know. But there are also a number of other things that go into the COVID Safe Plan, which the industry now will be making mandatory, not optional. Registration will be mandatory, not optional. And of course, these additional measures will reduce the risk that if there is another situation where there is transmission, and we hope there isn't, we hope there's prevention. But we also know, and I want to make this point very clear, that during a pandemic, when you're easing restrictions as we have been doing, you're going to get extra cases, and we have to live with that. There is no way that New South Wales will have zero cases during a pandemic. It's not going to happen, and we shouldn't expect that. We are always going to have cases when we've eased restrictions, and all of us have to accept that. But the reason why we are especially in high alert in New South Wales is also, of course, of what's happened in Victoria. The proximity, the geographic proximity of our states, the fact that there was some challenges with quarantine, potentially going back some months, means that we have that risk that there's been that level of community transmission in New South Wales for some time, which is why we are on extra high alert. And there will be phases during the pandemic when we are more concerned than other times. And this is the time that we are more concerned because we are still tracing what level of community transmission has occurred in the last few months that may be bubbling below the surface that we're not aware of. So what our aim is in New South Wales is to reduce those activities that have risk, and I'm deeply grateful again to the AHA for working with government. This is a good example of industry taking the initiative, coming forward and working with us to provide a COVID-safe way of moving forward. So I'm going to ask Dr. Chant to give her daily update. Well, she'll talk about the cases we've had overnight, including the total number emanating from those venues that were discussed. Then I'll ask John Whelan from the AHA to make a contribution, and then Minister Dominello and his team through Service New South Wales, who are supporting the industry with compliance, but also ensuring that we get information out to both businesses and also patrons about the new arrangements. And then, of course, we'll take questions after that. Dr. Chant.
Thank you, Premier. So there were 13 new cases of COVID were diagnosed in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night, bringing the total number of cases to 3,316. Of today's new cases, 2 are returned travellers in hotel quarantine and 1 is a known close contact of a previous overseas case, and they were isolating prior to their infectious period. So the 10 cases reported today are associated with the Crossroads Hotel and all live in southwestern Sydney. And of these, 3 attended the venue and 7 are close contacts of the cases. So we have a total of 23 cases have been associated with this cluster. Now, as you can imagine, this situation is evolving, and I apologise for us moving away from the standard numbers of the 8 p.m. to 8 p.m. daily. And so since 3 p.m. last night, we had an additional 7 cases that have been reported as linked to the hotel cluster, bringing the total number associated with the cluster to 28, and another case is under investigation. This includes 14 people who attended the hotel, and all the other cases are linked to these cases. So the new cases are a 40-year-old southwestern Sydney woman who attended the Crossroads Hotel on the 3rd of July, a 50-year-old Melbourne man who attended the Crossroads Hotel on the 3rd of July, a 30-year-old southwestern Sydney man who attended the Crossroads Hotel on the 3rd of July, 20-year-old southwestern Sydney woman who attended the Crossroads Hotel on the 3rd of July, a southwestern Sydney child who is a contact of the hotel case, a southwestern Sydney teenager who is a contact of the hotel case, and the 80-year-old southwestern Sydney man who is a content of the hotel case, and a 20-year-old southwestern Sydney man who is currently being interviewed by contact tracing experts. Clearly, this is showing that there has been a number of cases linked to the Crossroads Hotel on the 3rd of July. We have reached out to contact those people who are on the 3rd of July, but should you have been at that premise and not recorded your details at that time, we urge you to come forward and get tested, and please isolate yourself for 14 days. Even if you have a negative test, please remain in isolation for 14 days since that you left that hotel. For the period between, we've then extended the period calling everyone to isolate and come forward for testing for anyone who was at that hotel between the 3rd and the 10th when the hotel was closed for cleaning. It is essential that people come forward for testing. This will now enable us to understand the scope of spread associated with that facility, and remembering that there were other hotel staff who were positive who were working on other days. I'd particularly like to call out any members of the community who were at the hotel on the 9th of July, but also the 4th and 5th of July in particular. But we are urging anyone who was there between the 3rd and the 10th of July to self-isolate and get a test, and even if that test is negative, remain self-isolated for 14 days. One of the cases, the new cases, has also worked at the Casula Kmart on the 10th of July from 5 p.m. to midnight, and people were at that store at that time are urged to watch for symptoms and to self-isolate and get tested. Contact tracing is continuing for the staff and patrons, as I said, who are at the hotel between the 3rd and the 10th. There was also one of the cases visited the Preston's Lodge residential aged care facility during his infectious period, and no other cases have been identified at that facility, but as a precaution, the facility has been placed into lockdown. Investigations and contact tracing are occurring. One of the previously reported cases also attended the Picton Hotel and spent time in the gaming rooms on the 4th, 5th, 9th and 10th of July. And so all patrons and staff who were at the Picton Hotel on those dates are advised to self-isolate for 14 days since attending the hotel and present for testing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, I'm very pleased to be here today to support these changes to the requirements that are impacting hotels. We certainly believe that hotels in New South Wales absolutely need to do our part in stopping the spread of COVID throughout the community. A couple of the measures in particular we're particularly supportive of, and we actually approached government to say that these should be strengthened. The sign-in provisions we believe are very important, particularly in assisting health in that tracing ability going forward should there be a case. What we had was a situation from the 1st of June where everyone was required to sign in, and that was done. But then from the 1st of July, when the restrictions were eased, that requirement only went back to one person per group was required to sign in. We went back to government and we, recognising the circumstances had changed and the situation we're in, and also acknowledging that we need to do everything we can to assist health in trace those individuals that might be in contact with those people who have contact. We suggested that we bring it back to the original scenario where every individual was signed in and we had their details. And another measure that we also were very supportive of is this COVID safety hygiene marshal inside the venue. For the larger venues particularly, we think that will really enhance the safety within the venue in terms of social distancing, in terms of hygiene, in terms of cleaning in the venue. And we also think that it will actually make our patrons feel more comfortable coming to the venue, knowing that the venue is taking that extra step to ensure that it is a safe venue. So very pleased to be here today and certainly support these measures introduced by the government. Thank you.
Well, June was all about educating and working with the various industries to get them up to speed. July is always going to be about compliance, and today is a step in that journey. We are cranking up compliance, and today is a step in that journey. And I want to thank the AHA for working with government, coming forward with some meaningful solutions around how we can reduce the risk. One of the other things that we've introduced that is, as of 12:01 a.m. on Friday, every pub in New South Wales must download a COVID-safe plan and must register that plan with Service New South Wales. I repeat that. As of 12:01 on Friday, every pub and hotel in New South Wales must do two things. One, download the COVID-safe plan, and two, register that plan. I think that is a very big step forward, and I also welcome the fact that attendance sheets are going to be absolutely mandated for every pub and hotel in New South Wales, again, come 12:01 a.m. on Friday. These, together with the other measures that the Premier has already announced, will go a long way in reducing the risk. Ultimately, we have to work together as a community to defeat the spread of the virus. We can't do it alone. We've got to work with businesses, we've got to work with patrons, we've got to work with the people of our state, and today's a big step in that journey.
Premier, is this essentially admitting that those restrictions weren't tight enough, that those controls weren't there and it's got away from it?
No, I think what is really important to note, and the genomic testing or the detailed detective work that's being undertaken by health. It's important to note that it's highly likely, as I said last week, and potentially before then, highly likely that given the evolving situation in Victoria, that we did have, or New South Wales was exposed to underlying community transmission from that state, and the work that health is doing, whilst it's yet to get to that conclusion, demonstrates there is no doubt that the impact of what's happening in Victoria has impacted New South Wales, and that's why we are in a state of high alert. And this is, as I said, when the Victorian situation was evolving, this is a new phenomenon now for our continent, where previously, prior to what occurred in Victoria, the vast majority of cases in Australia were from overseas travellers and their direct contacts. We are now at a very different phase in the pandemic, when the vast majority of cases in Australia are from community to community transmission, and that impacts the way in which we deal with the disease. And I want to be very clear about that. That is why we closed the border. That is why we are taking extra measures on what might be considered more high-risk areas where contagion or spread of the disease can occur. Now, when you have a new evolving situation, when there is a new phenomena that is amongst us, you have to act accordingly, which is why New South Wales took the unprecedented step of closing our border for the first time in a century with Victoria, for issuing those permits to the border communities, and now in working with industries like the hotels to curtail any behaviour that could spread the virus in an unnecessary way. And that is obviously the phase that we're in. It's about managing situations as they evolve, and it's about making sure as much as possible that we control the spread of the virus. And I have always said, and I really want the community to be aware of this, that it's up to us also to do the right thing. Do not let your guard down with social distancing. Do not let your guard down with hand hygiene. Make sure you get tested. Can I thank literally the thousands and thousands of people every day coming forward to get tested? You are our warriors on the front line, because by getting tested, we can not only keep you and your loved ones safe, but also get really good information on what the virus is doing in the community, where it's heading, and our health experts. And I really want to congratulate, I'm not sure if this is being discussed publicly, but really want to congratulate that really smart physician who found the initial link between two cases in very different suburbs, who were then linked to the Crossroads Hotel. Now, that was really smart detective work in a matter of hours, which allowed us then to take the action we have. And this is the kind of detective work that goes on every day in New South Wales. But it also means that when our health officials have to deal with contact tracing, it is much easier to deal with a venue with a maximum of 300 people than it is for a venue that might have 600 or even more numbers. So this is all about reducing risk. It's about containing the spread. And it's about sending a strong message to the community that we continue to be on high alert. And every time we leave the home, we need to be aware of the vulnerabilities that exist, the way in which the virus spreads, and also the fact that as restrictions ease, coupled with the risk from Victoria, that we are in a stage of high alert. So anything we can do to curtail that risk is action we will take. And again, we're grateful to the AHA for working with government in dealing and managing that risk, and I deeply appreciate that. But it also, as I said, comes down to us. It disturbs me greatly when we see people not socially distancing. If you're waiting in a queue to buy a loaf of bread from your local bakery on a Saturday, keep that social distance. It's up to you to make sure there's enough space between the person in front of you and the person behind you. We are in a pandemic, and you can't have good compliance unless all of us take personal responsibility for the way in which we conduct ourselves as well. And in the main, it's been outstanding. But make sure that if you're organising a community event, if you are a voluntary organisation having a voluntary event, good social distancing has to be part and parcel of what you're doing. I cannot stress that enough. It's the advice our health experts have been giving us. We know exactly on paper what needs to happen. Now it's up to us to make sure it happens. If that means working with industry to reduce risk, we will do that. if that means making sure we encourage people at all times when they're leaving the house to think about their day and what they're doing and how it impacts others, absolutely that's the case. We want to be in a position in New South Wales where we continue to have strong quality of life, good quality of life, whilst we contain the spread of the virus. And that means keeping people in jobs, keeping things going, whilst also maintaining control of the virus.
Queensland has labelled Liverpool and Campbelltown hotspots and locked them out essentially of visiting Queensland. Are you considering putting individual restrictions on those areas for New South Wales?
Well, look, that's a matter for Queensland, but that is not in our consideration.
You won't be locking them down?
Not at this stage, no.
Given the Newmarch House experience, what precautions other than just the lockdown now being taken at Preston's?
Yeah, look, I might ask Dr. Chant to answer that question if that's okay.
So in relation to the Preston's facility, we are immediately testing the person that the case visited, and we're isolating that individual. Staff are using full protective equipment. So at the moment we have no evidence that the COVID has entered the aged care facility. All we know is that a case visited while they were potentially infectious. Obviously, we have learned that aged care facilities are one of our most high-risk settings, and so we are ensuring that we support that aged care facility with regular testing, close monitoring and infection control prevention advice.
Is there any further detail on the patient zero of this outbreak yet?
Our genomics team have been working around the clock. We are due to have some information later today, and then we obviously need to also access the sequence information from Victoria and compare that with any strains we may have had circulating in New South Wales, and also compare it with any strains that are in Victoria. Clearly, one of the cases I did indicate had been to Victoria, but as I said, in all of these investigations, it's incredibly important we remain open to whether we were missing community transmission in New South Wales, or whether it has been seeded by the transport up from Melbourne. So it's a bit premature to absolutely conclude that, but I hope to be able to update you probably by tomorrow if that genomics sequencing data comes to light this afternoon. I would also just like to say that whilst I'm focused incredibly, and the efforts of my team are focused on the Crossroads and the Casula and the Southwestern Sydney precinct, I think it's very important that we don't neglect the other areas of the state where we may have had seeding from Victorians who unknowingly came and were infectious at the time. They may have even come from areas that they weren't aware of were in hotspot areas, because obviously the virus was spreading. And it's important that in those areas where there has been high tourism from Victoria, or where you may have welcomed Victorians into your home, or New South Wales residents who have come back from holidays, it's essential that you, one, go to the Service New South Wales website and see what restrictions apply to you, because many of you will be required to be self-isolating. And the second is have them, at the minimum symptoms, come forward for testing. Even that vague headache, vague little bit of a fever, itchy, scratchy throat, runny nose, please come forward. This is a critical time for us to really get high levels of testing in the community so we can contain it. As you've seen, I've reported on over 28 cases. Now, if we did not identify these 28 cases, you can see that one of those cases was already a case of contact. And so this gives you an idea of how stealthily this virus can spread if we don't all play our role. And I would urge everyone to say, when we say self-isolate, please do so. We are not doing it. We know that it is an imposition, but this is such a critical phase, and we do not want to see community transmission established in New South Wales. But what I need you to do is adhere to the health advice, and also to come forward for testing. Thank you.
And in relation to the testing regime that we've got underway, you've set up some new pop-up clinics in the last 24 hours, but people are still worried that the earliest they can get into those centres is 8:30. Is there a reason we can't have them earlier so that people can do that before work, still get to work, still get to...
I would just like to say that no, it's really not about that also, but I'd just like to pause that people shouldn't be going to work if they've actually got symptoms.
Not the symptoms, but more if
And I've said it regardless of symptoms. But many people, I've also said, anyone who's been there should actually be self-isolating. So we're actually not recommending that people are off to work. We understand that the drive-through testing settings have been one of the most popular. And I really want to acknowledge the community's response to that. But having said that, we will look at all we can do to expand the reach and the scope of the clinics. There has been an additional drive-through set up at the Ash Road Sporting Complex at Preston's, and that's going to be opening from 0800 to 1800. And I'd also just like to thank the staff, many of whom stayed on and for longer due to the demand of the community. But we will continue to do our best to scale up testing in that environment. But please remain isolated when we've asked you to do so. This is just such a critical phase. And because I'm also very concerned about exposures at the Crossroads on the 9th of July in particular, and we know that there will be some time before you will have symptom onset, it's critical that you remain self-isolating. Otherwise, we've got another ring of people that we've got to actually do contact tracing for.
Just with the hotspot declaration, as we arrived when we had our temperatures checked, they asked us if we'd been to Liverpool or those areas. So is New South Wales Health now treating those areas as hotspots? So we've provided advice to aged care facilities across the state to say if you've been to any of those areas, exclude staff or residents that have been to exclude staff or visitors that have been to those areas. And that's a prudent measure because we've told everyone not to go there, but not everyone listens to the media or reads the media. So that's another safeguard that we've got in place. We've obviously communicated this to our districts and our CEs so that we've also had restrictions on visitors from Melbourne. We will add that if you've been into any of these areas that we've asked people to self-isolate, now is not the time to visit. You're meant to be isolating unless you need medical care. It's important that you don't go and visit relatives in hospital and you don't go into any critical facilities such as aged care. So this is just a prudent practice that we have in place of when we've got concerns, we ensure that those critical facilities are aware of it.
With the Balmain Woolworths situation a couple of weeks ago, you put out a very strong message for customers to get tested. Is that now the same for Kmart?
That's exactly right. So we were asking everyone who went to Kmart but on the 10th of July from 5 p.m. to midnight. And if you were at the store at the time, we urged you to watch for symptoms and self-isolate and get tested. And I would urge people that might not remember which day they went there to just check their their billing or talk to others. But if you've been there at all on that day through those hours of 5 p.m. to midnight, we urge you to self-isolate, get a test, and remain isolated for 14 days.
Do you have particular concerns about Picton? We've seen massive queues of people lining up there this morning, and there are concerns about an employee at a pharmacy in Tarmore, in the surrounding suburb, that's tested positive and has worked a shift on Sunday. Is there details about that at all?
Look, I haven't got that. As I said, I know that just as I was walking into this interview, that there was a 20-year-old in southwestern Sydney who is under investigation. I can't confirm the details of that. I've provided you with the most up-to-date. But obviously, as we finalise the press release, we will include any breaking news about sites we're calling out for. But this is a real time that we want the community to work with us. We know we are asking a lot of you, but now is the time that we can actually contain this transmission. And if we've learnt anything from the experience internationally and also in our own country, it is important that we cast the net very wide and then incrementally draw it back. Because if you don't cast it wide, you end up with chains of transmission going here and you haven't effectively blocked them. So we need this action which is decisive and extensive at this point in time, and we need the community to come forth. And I'm so grateful. I know that you've seen those lines, but for me, I am so grateful that the community has responded to come and get tested. Every case we have found, we have stopped many more transmission cases, and that's our aim and intent.
Premier, on a wider level, We have seen people not following the rules. We've seen these big parties on the weekend. We've seen pubs that have broken the rules and been fined for it. Are you considering further restrictions if we can't get this under control?
Well, certainly, can I thank the New South Wales Police Force, who've certainly stepped up their operations in relation to compliance. I think the last couple of weeks, Minister Dominello and myself in particular, have been talking about compliance, and that is incredibly important, and the police also have stepped up. There are harsh penalties in place for people doing the wrong thing. I want to be very clear about that. But what we need to make sure is not just that we identify those doing the wrong thing, but people stop doing the wrong thing in the first place. By now, everybody should be very clear about what's regarded as safe and what's not regarded as safe. And I just want to be very clear about that. I'm very grateful for the absolutely vast majority of people who are doing the right thing. But please know, if you're thinking about breaking the rules, you're actually risking not just your health, because you might think you're invincible, but your parents or your grandparents or loved ones in your community who've got an existing, or your friends who've got an existing condition, or your friends who might have a situation in their own medical history which means they're more vulnerable. So we ask everybody to think about their actions very carefully before they undertake them. We know it's a difficult time for everybody, but all of us have made huge sacrifices, and we ask everybody to please consider that. But please know the police have already indicated they're stepping up their activity. Our compliance regime across the state is also being stepped up, and we do have very harsh penalties in place. And we intend to use them when we have to, but we don't want it to get to that. We want people to accept that level of self-responsibility and do the right thing. And people in their tens of thousands and even millions every day are doing the right thing. But as we know, and as experience shows us here and around the world, it doesn't take many people for this to get out of control, and that's why it's really important for everybody to manage their own activities.
But with more and more cases, could we go into lockdown?
Overwhelming sense of dread that there are further lockdown measures coming. Can you tell us what industries are particularly high risk that you might be looking at tightening restrictions for?
Can I say the New South Wales government is obviously monitoring the situation on a daily basis. But none of us have anything to fear if everybody does the right thing. We should feel absolutely confident in the ability of our health experts, in the resources we've dedicated, in the experience and our learnings from since January. We've learned a lot in the last 6 months. We know so much more now than we did 6 months ago. So long as everybody respects the rules we've put in place, so long as everybody follows the health advice, and to Dr. Chant's comments, I hope everybody watching this tells their relatives also to go online or to ring up and get information on all those places that we want people to come forward and get tested if they've been to really be on high alert, to make sure their friends and family and co-workers, anybody else is aware of the health advice, because that's what will keep people safe.
During the initial lockdown, you said that it was a time to build up hospital capacity. I think we've got 2,000 ventilators here in New South Wales. It doesn't appear we've got any people on ventilators at the moment. We clearly have capacity. Well, at what point do you decide that it's time to stop putting the handbrake on the economy and let that extra capacity in the hospitals do what it's supposed to do?
Well, obviously, we have built up capacity for a reason. And that is there, and that's good for the community to know that. But we also know that the virus spreads extremely quickly. We never ever want to be in a situation where we go into lockdown, but if you had uncontained community spread indefinitely, that's thousands and thousands and thousands of cases. We have to be aware of that. Uncontained spread over a very short period of time. If you didn't have a lockdown, you could go from 100 cases to 1,000 cases in a very short period of time. We need to be very aware that this spread and the exponential growth of the virus is extremely quick. And that's why, yes, we have capacity. Do we want to use that capacity? Well, no, we want the community to stay safe. Are we going to have more cases as restrictions have eased? Of course we are. But we also want people to be aware of the risk. We don't want people to put themselves or their loved ones at risk, and we're very clear on what the risk is. But we also need to know that we're living with this for a long time, and cumulatively the cases will increase. Cumulatively we'll have to live with more cases, we'll have to contain the spread. That's a reality. But where we can, we want to avoid people getting unwell and worse, dying. Of course, that's why public health exists. But we also need to make sure, of course, that people continue to be employed, that our economy keeps continuing. And that's why we are so strong in giving the advice we do, because New South Wales is in a situation where we have the resources, we know what we need to do to contain the spread, but we also know that we can't do it without the community support, and the community support to date has been outstanding, and we want to encourage that further. But let us be in no state of illusion that the spread escalates very quickly, and the numbers, it's not just doubling and tripling, but over the course of weeks, you can get from, you know, a very small number of cases, as we do now, to a couple of thousand. It doesn't take much. We literally have our health experts contacting directly and indirectly thousands of people every day who may have been exposed. And as Dr. Chand explained, if you don't get to one person and that creates a new strain that pops up somewhere else in a month, that could then result in thousands of other cases. So let's be very aware that this is a situation which is volatile, where thousands can get affected in a very short period of time, and we have to live with that. We have to accept there will be more cases in New South Wales, and I can't say that strongly enough.
Do you have enough resources in that particular area, given there was a parliamentary inquiry this morning and some evidence and suggestions that people in that area are treated as second-class citizens?
Oh, can I just say, I object to that. The Minister for Health will have a better response than mine, but I'll have a go and then let him continue if he wants to. His responses are always better than mine. But first of all, we have our record spending in health, South-Western Sydney in particular. This is even before the pandemic. Since the pandemic, we have invested an extra $1 billion worth in relation to PPE, that equipment people need to keep themselves safe. We've invested an extra $1 billion at least in increasing health capacity, in terms of ventilators and ICU beds and all those extra things in staff training. As a state, we've invested at least an extra $250 million in deep cleaning. So these are all measures and resources we've put in to support our health system. And in infrastructure alone in southwestern Sydney, we literally have invested billions of dollars in either upgraded or building brand new hospitals. So can I put that to rest quite easily? Minister, do you want anything to add to that?
Just quickly.
Yeah.
Look, it is a record budget, $27 billion, and southwestern Sydney is receiving its fair share of that. And on top of that, we've put in an unprecedented way, a massive amount to support southwestern Sydney. Campbelltown Hospital alone, $630 million worth of new development. Bankstown Hospital, brand new one, $1.3 billion being built, $750 million going into Liverpool. So I think that whilst I understand that particular doctors in particular hospitals in their particular departments would always like more, there also has to be some acknowledgement that the government has actually put in as much as is humanly possible and far more than anybody could have imagined. And we will continue to do that. So I think it's, the correlation is just not there.
Richard,
Minister, like lack of funding is going to lead to deaths, not enough staff, not enough massive inequity between the southwest of Sydney and particularly the east of Sydney.
There is not inequity. There is actually a massive amount of money, $27 billion worth, going into New South Wales, and a massive budget in southwest Sydney. And as I just said, southwest Sydney and western Sydney have actually had a massive focus of a new hospital development. We have obviously, some of you may have attended the opening of Blacktown, the new Blacktown Hospital facilities, Mount Druitt Hospital facilities, Penrith facilities, as I said, Campbelltown Hospital, Liverpool Hospital. There will always be, in health, there will always be a demand for more money. That is the nature of health. But the government has put in an unprecedented amount, and we will continue to do what's necessary to support the people of Western and Southwestern Sydney.
What's the distinction between pubs and clubs?
Yeah, well, as you know, because of the nature of how they conduct themselves, you have to go in and write your name down when you go to a club anyway. So clubs already have those systems built into their business model. And so it's a very different thing for hotels, which a lot of this registration is obviously new to that sector, whereas for clubs it's been part of the way they operate. You walk into a venue, you either swipe your membership card or you write down physically. So there's that degree of registration and compliance. Can I just finish my sentence, please? Which already exists. And if we do identify compliance issues in any other industry, of course, we'll continue to work with industry as we have with the hotels. But please know that the AHA came to us proactively in wanting to work together with us to find this solution, and I'm deeply grateful that that's occurred. And can I also commend Minister Dominello, the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer, who have been tasked by me to make sure that we have those strong links with industry so that we can continue to work with industry, both in relation to monitoring what are higher risk activities, but also in relation to compliance. And we know that compliance is what we need to focus on in the next little while to make sure that patrons and businesses are aware of their responsibility, and not that we just rely on what on paper is responsibility, that in fact people are doing the right thing.
John,
Given that there's still 10,000
John,
people.
if we can, just two quick questions, John.
Last question, thank you.
From your point of view, what's happened with some of the pubs, the Golden Sheep, the Chimblebine, pretty embarrassing stuff. What do you say to them? And secondly, a follow-up, the whole registration system, a lot of people seem to be rorting it, putting in false numbers, false names.
Yeah.
There's giant loopholes there, isn't there?
Look, firstly, on the two cases that you mentioned, I think the hotel industry's learnt some lessons there. I think all industries, whether it's cafes, restaurants, even clubs, have learnt some lessons there. The obligation's on the venue. You need to do the right thing. This is a really serious issue here. We need to do all we can to prevent the spread of COVID right throughout New South Wales, and that's why we went to government, and particularly around the registration, which is the second part of your question, because we believe that it's really important that hotels are vigilant, they get the right names, they get the right details, so that it's available for health if they need that for tracing in future. So that's why we came to government in that regard.
Have we discovered that that wasn't the case at the crossroads, though?
I refused at the Queensland border since they opened last Friday. That's a staggering number. How concerned are you that Victorians have travelled through our state? Not only that, they've got to travel back home now.
Of course, I think my message is very clear. We are concerned that we may have had seeding from Victoria. Clearly the outbreak has been going on for some period in Victoria. I would urge and hope that all of those Victorians have acted responsibly and that they have self-isolated if required to. They've also not, sought out testing and stayed away from others if they had any symptoms. But I think this highlights the fact that we share a long border with Victoria. We're intrinsically linked with Victoria. We have a lot of travel and connections. So my message applies to New South Wales residents as much who have maybe travelled to Victoria, as well as Victorians who have travelled to New South Wales. Please adhere to the rules. Go to the Service New South Wales website and find out what you can do. And that may involve just going back to Victoria. And in terms of New South Wales residents, please get tested. Please isolate yourself if you've been in any hotspots, and again, make yourself aware of which particular orders you are subject to, because from anyone who arrived from Victoria after the 8th of July is actually required to self-isolate for 14 days, and we urge you to get tested. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.